Because for so long, deaf people like my parents have had to adapt to a hearing world, when in reality, that is a social responsibility. Because at the end of the day, you can learn to sign. My parents can't learn to hear. Hello, my name is Tara, and I'm a CODA. Not the kind that sits behind computer screens looking at symbols, letters, or numbers, but in my world, CODA means child of deaf adults. Two, both mum and dad. Us CODAs often describe ourselves as having dual identities, a little bit in the deaf world, a little bit in the hearing world, but quite often encompassing the languages and cultures of both. And this is my family. These are my parents, my brother, grandparents, aunties, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins. And in red, they're the deaf members of my family. In black, they're the hearing members of my family. So in my family, being hearing made us the minority. Growing up, Auslan was my first language. Auslan stands for Australian Sign Language and is the language of the deaf and hard of hearing people here in Australia, to which there are over 30,000 users. Auslan is a rich visual language that encompasses hand signs, facial expressions, body language and movement, all to communicate. We have our own grammar, sentence structure, and we're quite different from verbal and written English. Auslan is vital for the deaf and hard of hearing community. Growing up, Auslan to me wasn't something I had to learn. It was my childhood, my emotions, my family, and who I was. It wasn't something I could switch on or off. It really felt like home. But growing up with English as my second language wasn't always easy. I remember a time when I was about 14 and I was at a boy's house and we were watching a movie. And we're sitting there and he turns to me and he says, "Tara, can you pass me the remote?" And I'm looking and I must have had this puzzled look on my face because he said, "Tara, the remote right next to you?" And I looked down, sure enough, there's a black rectangular object with buttons on it, the remote. So I get home and I pull my mum and my brother into our lounge room and I pick up our own remote. And I look at my mum and I said, "Mum, this is a remote. Why did you tell us it was a beep beep?" And she looked at us with a bit of a smile and very matter-of-fact said, "Well, beep, TV turns on. Beep, TV turns off. Beep, beep." One of many reminders that Auslan is a visual language. I also had an occasion when I was about 7 and I was at little girlfriend. We were at her house and we were dancing in her bedroom to very loud music. And from somewhere else in the house, her mum yells out, "Turn down the music." And I remember standing there and just going, "Oh, I've never been told to turn down the music before." But then what happened next was an even stranger feeling. She proceeded to say, "Do you two want something to eat?" And my friend said, "Yes, please." You can communicate through walls. Because you see, in my house, if my brother or I wanted my mum or dad, we'd have to physically get up and walk to them. There was no yelling between walls. Wasn't always so fun with funny stories though. Growing up as a CODA with 2 deaf parents meant that I was the family's informal interpreter. So this meant I clocked on the minute anybody hearing spoke to my parents. This could be at the checkout, with the checkout chick asking how your day was. On the football field, with the coach wanting to talk to my dad about my brother's performance. Other parents wanting to ask my parents a question. Or at the mechanics, figuring out what's wrong with the car. booking appointments over the phone, attending those appointments, dental, medical, educational. All of these little daily interactions that we have, I was there bridging the gap for my mum and dad. It wasn't always easy. And growing up, being in the middle of two worlds, observing and participating in conversations that weren't mine, and quite often conversations I was a bit too young for, made me grow up, made me resent the responsibility. I felt like my childhood wasn't mine, but instead I was just a bridge for the deaf and the hearing world to connect. So while I love my parents, don't get me wrong, I resented the responsibility it laid on me. I resented the fact that I saw their struggles. I resented that I saw the barriers that they faced on a daily basis. I resented the fact that no matter how hard I tried, those barriers were always going to be there for them. But the guilt kicked in because those barriers weren't mine. Did you know over 90% of deaf adults have hearing children like myself? So that's a lot of coders out there probably feeling the way that I felt. This led to my late teens, early adulthood. I felt quite lost, not sure where I belonged. Essentially, I was too hearing for the deaf world, but too deaf for the hearing world, and I didn't know my place. So what I did was I withdrew. I went and figured myself out. I needed to know who I was without the label of being a coder, my identity, who Tara, standing here in front of you today, is. So I went and travelled the world. I immersed myself in community, culture and languages all around the globe, and I found it very ironic that those feelings of language, community and culture reminded me so much of what I left behind at home. It wasn't until I became a mother and I saw my mum hold my son for the first time. And in that split-second moment, I realised Auslan was and is so important. And now it was my responsibility to ensure that my son carried the language and culture of his family. And almost in that instant, my love and understanding of Auslan came back, and I found myself immersing myself back into the community. At home, I was teaching my son Auslan, especially after he turned about 1, and he was picking it up beautifully. I tell you, there is nothing cuter than tiny little hands signing mummy, finished, or truck. He signed truck wrong, my kid signed it right. At the same time, my son was also attending daycare. And the educators had noticed that when they were doing activities like colours, animals, or transport, my son was sitting there eagerly at the front signing along. And his little friends were also picking it up really cutely next to them. So what they did was they called me and they asked if I could come and teach the educators some Auslan so they can continue that language development for my son. This is when a light bulb came up for me. I realised that for my son, learning Auslan was bridging him to his grandparents. But for so many other children, this could be a valuable communication tool. We live in a multicultural society where English isn't necessarily a child's first or even second language. We have neurodiverse children that might struggle with verbal communication. So giving them a tool like Auslan can bridge the gap for their connection and communication, not only with their peers, but their educators, before their verbal communication can come past. So light bulb moment turned into tiny hand signs. My business that teaches and educates parents and educators Auslan to utilise with their young children, providing communication and connection for all children of abilities and backgrounds. Another did you know? Did you know that 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents? And those parents are often given little to no guidance about Auslan or the deaf community. And instead, they're told to just focus on verbal language. Interventions like a cochlear implant. And whilst there is a place for both of those in the community, I strongly believe that a deaf child should be made aware of their identity, their culture, their language, and that sits within the deaf community. So our goal at Tiny Hand Signs is to not only raise awareness, advocate, and educate about Auslan and the deaf community, but we also work within the deaf ecosystem. So this means we utilise deaf teachers, deaf educators, deaf illustrators, and deaf business leaders, all to foster that greater understanding of community, connection, and communication. I'm really proud to say that as of today, we have taught at over 36 daycares, multiple childcare play centres and libraries. I've written a book called Decode the CODA about my experiences as a CODA. And most importantly, I have helped 4 hearing families with deaf children integrate into the deaf community here in Australia. Those connections may have not happened otherwise. So I stand here today, having been through a journey where sometimes I wasn't telling stories that were my own, but instead bridging the stories of others. But it's made me realise how important communication, connection, representation, and community is. So I no longer wonder about whether or not I fit in the deaf world or the hearing world. I know I belong in both. So today, thank you, bit early, I'll take it. Today, I stand here a very proud CODA and mother of 2 GODAs, grandchildren of deaf adults. And I have 2 asks. The first is that you join me in learning 3 signs. So get your hands ready. Lovely. The first sign we're going to learn is communicate. As you can see, there's 2 C's. This is a reminder that communication is a 2-way street. So it takes 2 people to participate. The next is the deaf applause, which I hope you do when I'm finished. So applause, because it's a visual representation of the clap. And then lastly, my favourite, I love you. I think this should be used on a daily basis with your friends, your family, your partner, your children, your neighbours, your colleagues, your goldfish. Everybody needs a little bit more love. And if you're unsure of which fingers to put down, here's a tip my 4-year-old teaches me. I love you, Spider-Man. There you go. And before I leave you all today, if you wanted to learn Auslan and you just haven't gotten around to it, please do learn. Because for so long, deaf people like my parents have had to adapt to a hearing world, when in reality, that is a social responsibility. Because at the end of the day, you can learn to sign. My parents can't learn to hear. Thank you so much for being here. Yay.